I recently talked about how I improve my teams in Genshin or even create completely new ones, and shared a useful way to visualize the rotations, which makes the process a lot easier. It resonated with a lot of people, and many said it even helped them start to see some order in the chaos of combat. People said they would love to be able to create those diagrams themselves, so we made an app for it. Before we look at the app itself, let's quickly revisit how the visualization is structured. Each of the 4 character slots is represented by a line, and each action is a circle on that character's line. As time passes, we press each button when the timer reaches that circle. It's also useful when thinking about which actions will take place while a specific buff is active, or what can be fit in before a specific cooldown ends. If you've ever played a rhythm game, it should feel pretty similar. And in the app, we added a lot more detail compared to the diagrams we created manually for the original video. Let's run through how we'd create a team in the app, then show a real-world example where it made it super easy to give advice on how to improve a friend's team rotation, and then have a look through the important features we've added so far. After opening the app, to create a new team, we click either Create in the main menu or the Create button down at the bottom. This takes us to the rotation editor, and since this is a fresh new team, it opens up the character selection menu. Let's create a team I've been using a lot on my alt account, since I've never really focused too much on that team's rotation, and it would be interesting to think it through in more detail. This team includes Dendro Traveler, Yao Yao, Yelan, and Keqing. We can add them to the team either by dragging them over to an empty slot on the left, or just by clicking their avatar. Dragging one character onto another will swap those 2 characters, so we can reorder and rearrange the team easily. Now that we've added our characters, we can see the bare bones of the visualization. Each character has a track where their actions will live. To add an action, we click on the character's avatar, which will pop up the icons for their talents. If we click on a talent which only has one version, like the Traveler's skill here, it will instantly add it to the diagram. If we click one with multiple versions, like Yelan's skill, we have to select which version to add. If we want to add multiple actions quickly, we can hold down the Shift key to keep the actions visible and add as many as we want with just one click. We can rearrange the actions by dragging them around. Notice how the app repositions each icon automatically every time we do this. There are a couple of other settings for how this should behave, which we'll explain later on, but by default it optimizes the rotation so that each action will be used as soon as possible after the previous one's animation ends. When I play with this team, I tend to start with Yao Yao's skill, use the hold version of Yelan's skill and then her burst, then Traveler's skill and burst, and then attack with Keqing's burst, skill, and then her electro-infused normal or charged attacks. This looks pretty good so far, but we can see that there's a lot of time between the last action in the diagram and the indicators showing when Traveler's and Yelan's burst cooldowns will end. However, everyone's skill cooldowns are already over, so we could fill that time by casting Yao Yao's, Yelan's, and then Traveler's skills again, followed by the same Keqing rotation as before. We now have a rotation which looks fairly smooth. We get to use everyone's talents in a way which works together, and there's only a small amount of time at the end which we would need to fill before everyone's cooldowns reset, and we can start the rotation over again. As you can see, this rotation works just as expected in-game. The timing might be slightly off due to input latency, server lag, or other similar issues, but the rotation diagram is still an extremely useful guide and is great as a tool for quick experimentation. We can now save the rotation by clicking Save, or we could export the rotation to share it with others and ask for feedback or other improvements. Which leads us to the next question: what would that feedback even look like? Over the past couple of weeks, we asked some of our friends and community members to test out the app, and we got some great feedback. One particular interaction really showed how powerful this tool could be for helping one another out. A friend shared that they were farming a domain, and had realized that they were consistently using the same rotation of their characters over and over again without really thinking about it. They created that rotation in the app and shared it on our Discord. We use all of these characters a lot, so at a glance we could see a couple of quick improvements which would boost the damage of the team. Our friend sent over a link to their rotation, and my partner opened it up to make adjustments. First, he moved Raiden's skill to the start of the rotation instead of the middle, since that ensures all of the attacks early on in the rotation can trigger her coordinated attacks for extra damage and electro application. Second, he moved Jean's skill and burst earlier in the rotation, so that they were used after Ayato's burst but before his skill and normal attacks. This change means that Jean would swirl the electro-charged aura, and as a result her viridescent artifact set would reduce the enemy's resistance to both hydro and electro. These small tweaks resulted in rotation, which felt just as smooth, but did a lot more damage. The app made it incredibly easy to talk this through, since it was crystal clear exactly what we were suggesting, which made it a lot easier for everyone to understand the reasoning behind the changes. Since it was easier to understand the suggested tweaks, it was also easier to actually try them out, a great success. Now that we've seen it in action, let's take a closer look at the features we've added so far. The app's homepage is fairly simple. On first visit, it shows an example rotation, which we can edit to try out the rotation editor quickly. After we've created some rotations, the homepage lists them all with a search function which lets us look for a team which uses a specific character. If we click on a saved rotation, it takes us to the rotation editor, which is the most important part of the app and includes a bunch of features. The character selector is available here and comes with filtering built in with drag and drop support. Once a character has been added to a slot, we can then use their action selector, which lets us add new actions to the diagram just by clicking the icons. When there are actions visible in the diagram, we can drag and drop and reorder them. We can also view the details about that specific instance of an action by clicking on the icon and can delete the action from the rotation. The diagram also includes colored line to display the duration of any buffs caused by each action, and an indicator to show when an action's cooldown will end. The visualization also has several optional visual aids, an animated slider to help visualize the timing, an animation duration marker, and even timescale markers to mark each second in the rotation. The editor also has an undo-redo feature. The character data we use for the app is a mix of general information from the Genshin Wiki and frame count data from GC Sim. This currently includes all characters currently released, including all 4 elemental versions of Aether and Lumine. Our setup has native support for talents which switch state and change the character's actions, such as Cyno's burst or Ayato's skill, talents which reset the cooldown of another talent, such as Razor's or Yaya's bursts, talents which can be cast multiple times, talents which have a secondary cast function, like Kuching's skill or even Kujusara's crowfeather mechanic, and also elemental infusions, both self-applied and party-wide buffs. It also allows users to enter which constellation they have for each character. Any constellation lock changes to cooldowns, buff durations, talent resets, or multicast counts are fully and automatically included in the app. We have built in a number of different customization options into the settings page. Let's skip the simple toggles and focus on the important settings. The action and switch latency sliders adjust how many frames of latency are added whenever we use an action, or whenever we switch characters. Most Genshin players will experience a few frames of latency for both of these categories, since the game calls home to the server for each interaction, so the default latency is set to 6 frames for each. These 2 sliders allow us to adjust the latency to roughly match our local connection speed. The optimized setting is the most nuanced and has 3 options: strict, basic, and none. Strict mode aims to optimize the team's rotation as much as possible. It automatically repositions any action so that it's used as early as possibly can be, taking into account animation timings, cooldowns, latency, and so on. This is generally the recommended setting, since it should result in the idealized version of the rotation. Basic mode aims to allow for some freedom when placing actions, while still enforcing all of the factors which can affect when we are able to use an action. For example, in strict mode, the first action we add to the rotation will always be pinned to the left of the diagram. In basic mode, we can position that initial action wherever we want. However, regardless of where we place that initial action, the app will not allow us to place a second action inside of the first action's animation frames, since that would not be possible in-game. This may feel more natural to some people, though it's generally not recommended because repositioning groups of actions can be quite tedious with this setting enabled. Finally, none allows us to disable the optimization algorithm entirely, which lets us freely place actions wherever we want on the timeline, even if those placements would be impossible in-game. This will rarely be very useful, but we decided to include it anyway since it could be useful for communication. For example, if someone notices a mistake we've made in how a character works in the app, they could create a rotation in strict mode, which shows what the app outputs, and then disable optimization so that they can tweak the rotation to show us what results they would expect. The final section is character settings. If we enable character configs, we can see a list of all the characters. When we click a character icon, it pops up a settings view for that character. For now, the only setting we have added here is the character's constellation, but in future we may add their equipment here too. After we've added our constellations, the character selector list in the editor displays the constellation number next to each avatar, and also filters out all characters we do not have. As mentioned before, any constellation locked changes to cooldowns, buff durations, talent resets, or multicast counts are automatically included in the app if this setting has been used. If we ever want to delete our character settings, we can just click the Clear Character Configs button here. This app is a work in progress. We're still adding new features to it and ironing out some bugs. If you spot anything which is incorrect or broken, or have any questions or ideas, the best place to share them is on our Discord server. We would also welcome any good examples to add to pre-built teams for people to import and play around with. I'm also always happy to talk Genshin while I'm streaming on Twitch, even if I'm playing a different game. Hopefully the app will be of use to people and help make it easier to talk about our teams. Until next time!